拜登上台以后，该如何观察美中台关系动态的发展？今天为您邀请到的是哈佛大学甘迺迪政府学院创院的院长 Professor Graham Allison 来为我们分析。Professor Allison, good evening. It's great having this opportunity to talk to you. Would you like to say hi to everyone at Forum and our viewers in Taiwan?
I say what a pleasure it is for me to have an opportunity to speak with you, and I only wish I could be there in person. I've said frequently here in the U.S. that we had the Taiwanese government managing our coronavirus crisis, we would have a much better society at this point. So your government and society has done a spectacular job. You're kind of the role model for the rest of us. And I was talking actually to Governor Cuomo in New York recently, and I said to him, do you know how many people there are in Taiwan? And he said, no, how many? I said, about as many as in all of New York State, and also most of New Jersey. And he said, whoa, that's a lot of people. I said, and do you know how many people in Taiwan died from coronavirus? He said, no, how many? I said, 7. He said, what? I said, 7.
Less than 10.
He said, that can't be. But in any case, something that, so your society has done a great job, and I congratulate you.
Professor Allison, first let me start off with a plain and simple question. Well, a change in administration is strained U.S.-China relations because during the 2020 presidential election, Biden had been pushed quite sharply to the right in terms of a much more hawkish voice on China. What does the Biden presidency mean for China?
Well, that's a big question. Obviously, we're in the midst of a fairly dramatic set of events here in the U.S., simply getting rid of one president and getting the next one in office. The campaign, certainly China became a political football, Trump trying to blame China for everything, including what he called the China virus, and Biden in the realities of domestic politics, having to show that he was not softer on China than Trump. So I would say there's been a lot of political noise, but there's going to be a very sharp difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration on China. And I summarized it for some Chinese friends in terms of 5 R's. First is going to be a return to normal. So normal in the sense of not policy by tweet in the middle of the night, but rather normal procedures. Secondly, there's going to be a reversal of a number of the mistakes that the Trump administration made. On day one, Biden will rejoin the Paris Accord, and he'll rejoin the WHO and a number of other organizations. There's going to be third, a review of Trump's so-called 159 accomplishments, but looking at him from the perspective of American interests. So actually, a number of the sanctions that were put on actually were counterproductive and hurt the U.S. more than China. There's going to be fourth, the realism about the fact that China is a fierce rival for as far as we can see. But finally, a sophisticated, responsible recognition that the U.S. and China live on a small planet where we have to coexist because the only alternative is to co-destruct. So sorry, that's a long answer, but I think we're going to be all safer in a world with President Biden.
The Chinese government always testing incoming American presidents. What are the key topics that are going to define the U.S.-China relationship in the next 4 years?
Well, again, a big question. I would say of the flashpoints that worry me the most is Taiwan. So unfortunately, one can now imagine accidents or incidents or even provocations that could occur in Taiwan that would set off a spiral of reactions that could end up even dragging the U.S. and China into a catastrophic war in which Taiwan and many others would be collateral damage. So I think one big issue will be war and peace. Another issue will be climate. President Trump tried to deal with that by simply denying it. Biden realizes we both inhabit a very small, contained biosphere. China is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter. U.S. is number 2. Unless we find ways to constrain these together, none of us going to be able to live in the climate in 50 years. And thirdly, in the domain of trade in particular, Biden understands that China is now a second backbone of the global economy. Other economies are not going to cut themselves off from China. The Trump administration attempt to have a so-called new economic iron curtain, not going to happen. Japan's number 1 trading partner, China. South Korea's number 1 trading partner, China. Australia's number 1 trading partner, China. So dealing with the trade issue in order to get a level playing field and to constrain the unacceptable behavior of China will be another big part of his challenge.
Talking about Taiwan, Professor Allison, during the Trump era, a record $18.3 billion in arms sales was approved, and the weapon system have become increasingly advanced. We've seen high-level visits, and Congress passed the Taiwan Assurance Act. That is mostly symbolic, but still helps deepen the relationship. And Trump administration is lifting decades-old restrictions between American and Taiwanese officials. Can we expect this carries over into Biden administration? Will Biden use Taiwan to rattle China?
Another excellent and difficult question. I'll try to resist, professors at risk of giving lectures on every topic. But I would say on this one, extremely complicated, because on the one hand, the U.S. relationship with Taiwan has been thickened, and Americans greatly admire Taiwan and the society and economy and polity that Taiwan has built. And so I think thicker relations between the U.S. and Taiwan is a good thing. At the same time, President Biden understands there's only one China. So there's no ambiguity about one China. The capital of one China is Beijing. There is not an independent country called Taiwan, and the U.S. is not going to recognize an independent Taiwan. The aspirations of Taiwanese today and of the Beijing government today are incompatible. So this is a problem that can't be solved, but it can be managed. And actually Biden, because he's watched this for many, many years, he's not a novice. He's a well-grounded, well-seasoned professional. He was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and watched this through the period now for 40 years. So basically he understands that somehow or another, despite the fact that Beijing and Taipei had very different visions of the future, it was possible for them to somehow live for the last 5 decades to manage, not solve, but manage an irresolvable problem. And the result of that has been the biggest increase in well-being for people on both sides of the strait than they've ever seen in 4,000 years of history. So I think Biden will be challenged to think about what could be a new formula, no longer the one nation, two systems or one China, two systems. That's now exhausted. But what's a new a framework in which not happy, not satisfied, not solved, but nonetheless, Beijing and Taipei and the US would all be better off than in the alternative, because the alternative of a war could turn out to be destructive for all of us.
Yes. Professor, Trump's embrace of Taiwan as political entity separates from Chinese sovereignty has been the most galling to Beijing. However, some would argue that China could have become an even bigger threat to Taiwan if Trump served for 4 more years. Biden administration's China policy is expected to significantly, as you said, differ from Trump's. Do you think Biden's Taiwan policy would be more predictable?
Absolutely. So Trump is nothing if not unpredictable to everybody. I think even to himself. He often doesn't know what he thinks until he tweets about it. That can be in the middle of the night. People who work for him, including many of my friends and colleagues, try to hope not to be awakened in the middle of the night with a new tweet discovery that announced policy has gone off in a new direction. So I would say Biden, we know, is a person who is normal. He's a very normal human being. He believes in predictability. He believes in order. He believes in orderly decision-making. He believes in orderly meeting. He believes in principles. So I think we have seen this political leader, Joe Biden. I now know him over 4 decades. This person is the person he is, and he's going to be the person he is. And I think actually he's extremely well suited for the challenge that he will face as our 46th president.
Indeed. Professor, all eyes are now turning to how the incoming administration will manage its critical trading relationship with China. The cross of U.S.-China relations was never about trade imbalances. The real battlefield was technology. Biden said that he is not going to actually change any of the trade arrangement until he gets some leverage. What do you think would create a kind of leverage economically over China? Is there a possibility you could create leverage?
Well, again, a complicated question. So if you ask about Trump's tariffs, is the U.S. better off or worse off as a result of them? So Trump said the problem was the bilateral trade imbalance with China. So that's the metric, the measurement. Has that bilateral trade imbalance gone up or down during the Trump administration? The answer is it's gone up. So the medicine that Trump administered to try to deal with what he said was the problem has not worked. Now, actually, bilateral trade deficits are not themselves a major concern. The problem of intellectual theft, theft of intellectual property, that's a real concern. The problem of protectionism and promotion of champion industries to the disadvantage of the U.S. and the world, that's a real problem. The problem, so there are a number, the problem of not having predictable, enforceable contracts, that's a real problem. But the issue that Trump faced or focused on was not the primary problem. The technology rivalry, you rightly say, is going to be at the heart of what is ultimately the rivalry between two great powers, a classic Thucydidean rivalry, as I've written about. So China, as it achieves the China dream, that is to make China great again, each day is getting bigger and stronger. And as it does so, it's encroaching on the positions and prerogatives that Americans believe are naturally ours after an American century in which we've been at the top of every pecking order. So I think the technology piece will become a more intense part of the competition between the US and China. And that's an interesting, complicated case for Taiwan because of Taiwan's Taiwan semiconductor as well as other Taiwanese industries. Taiwan is not just an assembler or manufacturer, but Taiwan is actually a player in this space.
Yes, Professor, we read your book. In your book, you said China and the United States are heading toward a war neither wants. When a rising power threatens to display a ruling one, violence is the likeliest result. Between American first and the Chinese dream, do you think that war is inevitable with Biden in the White House?
So let me be absolutely clear. So in my book, I say that what is inevitable is a genuine Thucydidean rivalry. China is a meteoric rising power. the U.S. is a colossal ruling power. As Thucydides taught us 2,500 years ago, when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, tighten your seatbelt, danger ahead, most often, not always, but most often, war. So in my book, I look at the last 500 years. I find 16 cases when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, 12 end in war, but 4 no war. So no, war between the US and China, not inevitable. It's just if we accept diplomacy as usual or business as usual, we should expect history as usual. And history as usual would be a war, even a catastrophic war, that neither the US or China wanted, but Germany and Great Britain didn't want a war in 1914. It was just an assassination of an archduke that triggered a spiral of reactions that dragged people to a war nobody wanted. Actually, Athens and Sparta had negotiated a 30-year peace, which was working rather well until there was a third party, Corcyra and Corinth, that got into a conflict that then dragged them in. So I would say war between the US and China, not inevitable, but I think the challenge for President Biden, and similarly the challenge for President Xi Jinping, will be to appreciate that they're caught in the grips of a structural rivalry that you can't escape, but how you manage the rivalry and whether you allow it to catch you in the trap ultimately into a war, that's the challenge of statecraft. And I would say, fortunately, in the case of President Biden, we have a well-seasoned statesman who appreciates this problem.
Thank you, Professor Allison. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Look forward to learning from you in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope that I have an opportunity to see you face to face in 3 dimensions before too long.